All right, we are live. This is the first one I've done in a little while, and it was just inspired by a lot of conversations, I guess, that I've been seeing around the place on Reddit and on a couple of the forums, just discussing this film that's got Willem Dafoe and Christoph Waltz in, and a lot of people aren't impressed with the way that it looks, the way that it feels, and I wanted to just get a little bit into that and talk about it. Now, I would normally do this kind of thing as a full-on breakdown and, get all the frames up on the iPad and chat through it and draw it out. But I figured that in this scenario, it's a little bit easier for me to just do a live and not have to then go through the process of editing it. Gives me leave to be a little bit freer with how I'm discussing things and not have to be so formulaic and think about it as much. And hopefully, it also gives it over to the room, as it were, to feed in on the chat. If anyone is watching, then I've got the chat up in front of me on an iPad. So if you did have any comments or questions, thoughts, opinions, you can drop them in the chat and I'll see them on there. So it can be a little bit more of an open dialogue. That said, when I've done these in the past, a lot of the time people don't necessarily want to feed in. They just are there for the ride and to watch it. So that is fine as well. A couple of things to think about with this. I'm a working director of photography. I have worked in the industry for a number of years now. So I don't really take it lightly looking at something and saying, well, that's bad work. That's someone doing their job to a degree that I don't respect it. It's not about that. It's more whenever I look at something and I see that there is perhaps an imperfection in the way that it has been done, or what I perceive to be an imperfection, then I like to analyze that. I like to understand why, so that if I find myself in a similar situation, I might be able to come to that armed with the knowledge that this is how you can get around that. This is something that might happen. And really, that preparation is invaluable in a lot of ways. Having said that, we do start to deviate from the technical at some point and veer more over to an artistic point of view, especially when we're talking about the way project overall looks. When we're looking at the grade, there is a technically correct grade where you're just making the colors accurate to whatever you're thinking. Is it a Pantone reference for Coca-Cola Red, or is it something which is very heavily stylized? And in this situation, it's veering more towards the heavily stylized with the sepia tone. For anyone who doesn't understand what I'm talking about, I'm going to fire up the DaVinci feed just here, and we're just going to flick through a couple of shots and just talk about it a little bit, really. So let's get DaVinci up, and I should have, actually, to explain this, I've got a little ATEM in front of me, so I should have the ability just to run a macro, fingers crossed, and kick myself, yeah, there we go, into the corner. So this is Dead for a Dollar. It's a Western film. It has a good cast, some working actors, some very well-known, even A-list actors, and then the people who are involved in the film's production, from the director to the cinematographer. They have been in the industry for years and years and years, and I've seen their work before. I didn't realize until I delved into it, the director behind this is the guy who made The Warriors, and that's a cult classic film. It's not necessarily a film which a lot of people would associate with I don't know, like it's not a Steven Spielberg film, but it has a vibe to it. And, you kind of got to respect that someone's been in the industry for that long, been working, and a lot of people want to work with him. Obviously, they're there and they're just they're just pulled into this, and at some point something's gone wrong. Hello, we have Rhett Thompson. Yeah, Rhett Thompson from Reddit. He might be the reason that all of this is happening right now, because there have been a couple of threads which he's been feeding into and starting up the conversation there. So thank you for joining us. I'm just going to give this a little play. I'm going to dip down the volume. Probably going to kick it into double time so that we can avoid, well, it's a lengthy runtime on this little trailer. And I have to admit, I think that there's an argument, not particularly in this to get right into the editing, but there's an argument for if this was a trailer, it should have been a little bit shorter than this, and maybe it could have chosen scenes a little bit more carefully. Certainly, when I've been looking through, I've highlighted a couple of scenes within the timeline that I think you could cut together into a decent trailer. So, what is the problem here? Well, looking at the way that this whole thing is graded, it has this wash, this sort of sepia wash over the whole thing. And it isn't just that, but that's a big part of why people are going, oh, this doesn't quite feel right. The directing and the acting does feel a little bit off. And it might be that they picked weird bits to stick in the trailer. Very hard to make a judgment on that when you're just looking at 2 minutes of a film. I will reserve judgment till I've watched the whole thing, and I will watch the whole thing. I will give it the time of day. But when you're looking at some of those shots in there, if we just nip back through, the outdoor shots are outdoor shots. We can talk about how you approach that kind of thing. But they're using a lot of hard light, especially right at the beginning, when we get right into the beginning of the trailer and they're in the prison. Let's flick back through there. Yeah. A lot of hard light. You got light shafts coming through the background. On the face of it, this could be a really nice scene. But I don't know. Personally, I've seen this in my own work. Look at Willem Dafoe's forehead just there. He's so far above exposure on his forehead. And it might feel like that. It might literally be like that. But I see this when I go out there and I shoot things and I haven't got it quite right. And that's the critical factor here. I'm relying on my own experience to tell me what is right and what is wrong here. I will sometimes light things and it will end up feeling a little bit like this. I'm trying to get a hard shaft of light coming through, hard light playing on someone's face. We had it just the other week for a project which I can't talk about, but it's launching quite soon, where we're doing kind of a period drama piece, and I wanted a light coming through windows as someone ran down a corridor. Now, for the first 20 minutes of lighting that, I had the hard light coming through the windows, but it wasn't all quite gelling together. We need to get the atmosphere into the air, and that helped, but then we needed some more light in the background, and we needed some room tone just to feed something back into the talent, because when you're lighting like this and when you're trying to create a vibe for someone in a prison cell just here, look at what's going on in his face. So you've got the hard light coming in, that is sunlight, but then you've also got another hard light source which is lighting his face. It's a confusing combination of things, because that combination means that you've got another hard light source in that prison cell as well as the sun that's coming through from whatever it is, a skylight, a gap in the ceiling, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't quite play right. Normally you would pair the hard sunlight coming in with a softer wraparound of fill or something that's meant to be bouncing off a wall. Having the two hard light sources, but one being much brighter than the other, is an odd combination. Move into Christoph Waltz coming in. Again, he's getting that hard kick of light as well. We go into a black and white sequence here, which is kind of a flashback thing. But combining the black and white with sepia, odd stylistic choice. Not for me, perhaps. And I think, and a lot of people have commented on this, if you had access to the raw footage, you could color this a different way. But I don't think it's just the coloring that is doing this. So what I intend to do now is just go through and kind of do a tentative grade on it. Now it's going to be super limited because I don't have access to the raw files. I don't have access to anything but this already sepia graded compressed trailer. And I think that the way to save this is to go a little bit The Lighthouse, another Willem Dafoe film, turn it all black and white. If I had to salvage this and this was all that I had, I would say turn it black and white. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One, I think the sepia is a little bit odd. So if we had to, absolutely had to, we can just kick down the saturation. Let's bring up no graph just here. And I think I'll put the saturation at the end of the chain, just desaturate at the end of the chain. And then prior to that, you can just be tweaking a little bit with contrast levels, lift, gamma, gain, just to get something a little bit more stylized and dramatic. But I think immediately it looks a lot better just black and white. And we can go through a few of these scenes and just carry across the grade. And I think that actually a lot of the imperfections, seamlessly into the flashback just there, get washed away by the fact that you are just seeing everything monochromatic. Now, why is that? I believe, and I've been looking at this and trying to work out why I feel this way, but I believe that when you are watching a black and white film, there is an expectation of certain things that you perhaps don't even think about as a casual viewer, but the expectation that you are going to be seeing things with harder light sources, because you go back to the 30s, the 40s, it was more common to light people with a much harder light. So a couple of the elements here that maybe aren't gelling quite so well actually just get washed into the background somewhat by the fact that it's then pushed into black and white. Feels a little bit more natural like that. It also takes the contrast a little bit better. So even dialing up the contrast just on this heavily compressed version just here, it doesn't feel bad. It just feels like a bolder stylistic choice than the wash of sepia tone. Continue. And we're into more flashback. I'm going to skip right through all of these bits. Now, the wides and the vistas, actually interesting because there are some onset photographs which are full color, not washed with sepia, and there are a couple outside as well. There's so much detail, there's so much clarity in what you're seeing when you look at those that when you come back to these, that it's a very flat shot. He's wearing a hat. He's obviously getting a little push of light underneath because otherwise you wouldn't be able to see under his hat. Classic Clint Eastwood think, he had the light firing in under his hat into his eyes, which is why he was squinting in order to actually see his face. Here it's a much softer push, but it ends up looking a little bit flat, and that happens quite a lot. This sequence where we have them busting in from outside, super hot outside, everything just goes off to overexposure. Now, I'm not one to complain necessarily about a stylistic choice to say that the outside is super bright and super hot, but then you've got an indoor scene which, because of the way that this is lit, because of how everything is composed here, you just have shades and tones of beigey gray, and it doesn't give you a lot as a viewer, in my opinion, to latch onto, in terms of working out which characters which, in terms of just working out the geography in the scene, knowing who's where and what they're doing, and when you cut to another angle, what you're meant to be seeing. It doesn't work very, very well at all. So I would have said having a more dramatic light in this situation, making the outside a little bit less bright, exposing down, and then bringing some harder light sources inside and highlighting certain areas would actually help with a shot like this, I think, in my opinion. This one's not so bad. I mean, you're getting the light from the other side, take it down to black and white. It's going to be a pretty straightforward process just to go through and do this. But I think you would get a much, much stronger result if you went stylized black and white on those shots than the sepia. Outside again, very, very flat shot. What's interesting, and I'm going to cut to a different timeline actually. When you look at other westerns made a very, very long time ago, you're in a desert, you're in a little dirt town, it's all sort of wood, there are lots of those tones there, and you naturally will see that. It's kind of a given. You're not expecting to see bright technicolor landscapes and vivid clothing, but the way that they get around that, or get around, I don't suppose they're getting around it, they're playing to it here. And you have, you have a interesting scenario where, losing my macros, there we go, where you have a very beigey grey scene, but the way that they're focusing your eye on the characters is to play it with someone in silhouette, play it with, so the building on the side is in silhouette. So all of this kind of stuff really helps to draw your eye, to make sure that you know as a viewer where you're looking, who's who. People have their silhouettes. You can really sculpt that with your production design, with careful framing, all of that kind of stuff. The time of day that you shoot, where you position the camera, and then bringing in neg and stuff if you need to. But a lot of the time, it's kind of there for the taking, as long as you know how to work your schedule, how to work your camera angles to make it go your way. I think this is another good example just here. This gentleman has a hat on. He's getting light into his face, so that really helps to give him a little bit of an edge. He's still pretty flat on this side. He's not completely sculpted, but you can see things in the background. You can see different colors. There's a pop of gold going on here. This is kind of greeny. This is redder brown, sort of almost wooden, rusty kind of vibe. There are bright areas down here. There's a shape going on in the background. His shirt has a little bit of a red tonality to it. There is a lot more going on within that one frame, where you can actually start to, I don't know, let your eye soak up a little bit what's going on in the frame. If that was over to a sepia grade, and let's go that way. Let's take this completely over to something sepia. I'm going to have to desaturate it a little bit. Let's do that on another node as well. But I think if we're getting into that realm, I apologize unreservedly, Sergio Leone. And then contrast, I suppose, should come down a little bit. I'll maybe boost the saturation back up now. It isn't as nice. But it still actually has a little bit of charm to it. So the point, I suppose, by bringing in this unfair comparison, it's an iconic film, beautifully executed. If you're comparing this to the frames that we're seeing in Dead for a Dollar, you can see it's not just the grade that makes it a bad frame. This does not improve it, doing this to it. But there are other things going on within this frame, with the lighting, with the composition, that actually still hold it together, still hold your eye. It's not as good, not nearly as good, not nearly as nice, but it still has something about it. And just skip through to a couple of the other shots. Again, you can see there's a silhouette. It's still super bright outside. It's not like we've gone to a world where the West isn't really hot and sunny and, kind of oppressive in that respect. But you can make out things. You can see shapes. It's got enough. Love this example. It is just a landscape of gray. You got a lot of grain in the shot as well, a lot of graininess. There's still blue in the sky. They've chosen their time of day. So the sun's coming across here. You got shadows going out this way. Helps to create depth and a little bit of 3D kind of vibe to it, because you have that contrast layering across the shot. You have highlights on the rooftop just there. You have highlights catching here and here. It gives it a much more interesting and I don't know. It's not even that it's lifelike. It's just more alive as a shot than what we're seeing in Dead for a Dollar. Love this one. A horse is riding towards you. They're kicking up a dust cloud, and that simplifies the area that they're in. They are just then silhouettes against that dust cloud. I'm not saying that every shot, you want or be able to do that, but it's just a cool thing. And then indoors, none of this is necessarily particularly realistic either. I think that is important to say. I'm not aiming for kind of a modern cinema soft look when I'm comparing, this to Fistful of Dollars. This is a very stylized look just here. It's not even beautiful on the skin. You're picking up all kinds of specular highlights from several hard sources. I mean, he's getting it zinging in his eye just there. We're catching something this side. You've got the lamp light, which clearly isn't doing all of this because you can see the light source shining in the lamp itself. But even though all of that's going on, because the frame is composed in such a way, because it's not been treated by some kind of crazy sepia tone wash over the top, it feels good. So stylized shots, stylized looks where you have those hard light sources pinging in people's eyes. You end up with lots of unpleasant artifacts like reflections in the skin just kicking straight back at the camera. But in a stylized sense, it still works. Hard light coming in. She's maybe getting a little bit of film. Maybe it is just a return from the sand at that point, but it could be a bounce just kicking back into her face just there, because if you look at her skin tone versus his, he's not getting nearly as much, but skin tone probably plays a little bit darker as well. So it's just interesting. Now I'm going to flick back to Dead for a Dollar. I think I called it Fistful of Dollars a moment ago. It certainly is not. And that's the problem. It is just taking out the character of the locations. It's taking out the character of the characters, and you're left with something which just doesn't have as much goodness in it visually, compositionally, all the rest of it. It isn't as compelling. Now, I don't want to spend too long on this live just going over every single shot, but having a look at some of the onset photography just here is fascinating, because when you go out on a film set, they will have an onset photographer, and I'll give the guy a shout, actually. This was Lewis Jacobs. He was the onset photographer for this film, and he's been in the industry for a long time. Checked him out, and he's been on a lot of film sets. So what he has shot here is, I think, a pretty good barometer of the way things looked prior to any grading. Now, you can split hairs on camera systems and lensing and all the rest of it, but he's probably shooting on digital. He's probably using a relatively modern camera. I think that this is a pretty good gauge of the way things probably looked prior to the grade. So let's jump into that, get my macros right this time. Now, I don't necessarily think that as a look, this is the perfect look to go for. But goodness me, does that not look a million times more compelling than the sepia tone? Again, bar scene, we've got color, we've got variation. The background, the wood in the background, you've got pink kind of vibe going on in the back just there. You can see some detail in his shirt compared to his skin. You can see his stubble a little bit better. You can see he's got a band around his hat. And it's none of these things are what you're meant to be looking at when you're watching a film. You're not meant to be going, oh yeah, there's kind of a pinky wood in the background. But it just gives you a little bit more to believe in the environment, in the world. And this, all of the things that the set design and all of the production design staff have worked on doing this, you're kind of just throwing it all under the bus when it goes out to grade and you get that back. I'm not a massive fan of the way this one is lit for most of the cast, actually. I think Christoph Waltz comes out okay. She does not get the best lighting just there, and our gentleman on the left does not either. So a little bit hit and miss on that one. And then this one is super, super hot on Willem Dafoe just there. I'm going to play devil's advocate here and say this was the film. This was how it was meant to look. I actually did create a couple of looks preemptively for this. So suppose we did want to go with a slightly more stylized look for it. I've just loaded up a little bit of Film Convert there. And I don't necessarily think that that massively improves it. But supposing you did want to go for a more washed tone, you can still get that vibe, but you retain a little bit more detail. You know, look at the bridles on the horses and all of this around here, and the different colors of his cravat versus this guy's kind of throw shawl scarf, whatever you want to call it. The fact that this guy's shirt is a different color from his hat, and from this guy's hat and this guy's waistcoat, it has a lot more detail. You're not taking all of that away. I think that this scene in particular is one, again, load that up. Now that's gone a little bit hot just there. You might drop down the exposure a bit. But it still has enough detail and enough variation with a wash on it. So I don't believe for a minute that it was a done deal at the beginning of filming to have this look the way that we see. Let's bring it down so that she actually gets good exposure. So with that exposure just there on her face, that's probably where I'd put her, because she's got very pale complexion. Christoph Waltz fares okay. Our gentleman on the left, not so much. I'd probably, if it was important to see him, if it wasn't meant to be like he was receding into the shadows, you'd want a little bit of edge, or to bring in some kind of backlight perhaps. And I think both of them would benefit from that, a little bit of backlight or something. It's a stylistic choice, but the point is you can make it look a darn sight better than they have, which is sad. You think about how much work people will put into a film, and even if you've done all of the things you wanted to up until the point of handing it over to editing and grade, it still comes out and it doesn't work. And as someone who's worked now, goodness, more than 12 years, and over those 12 years, I've had to edit a lot of my own work. I started off editing my own work, I started grading my own work, and I still take an active role in that. As a cinematographer, as a director of photography, whatever you want to call it, knowing how your work gets interpreted is very important, and understanding camera systems, understanding what's going to translate. Because I look at some of the shots in here and I feel like they would have rendered better on film. I feel like they would have perhaps done better if they were converted to black and white, because you would forgive, let's say in this shot just here, you would forgive some of the hard lighting. Hard light can be fantastic, and we kind of saw in those other shots from Once Upon a Time in the West, there is a lot of hard lighting going on, and it works, and it is a vibe. It's an aesthetic that I could get behind, and I would enjoy shooting something like that. But the way that the hard light is used in this feels a little bit more like kind of a golden age kind of Hollywood vibe, a little bit more, we just need light on the talent. And then when they're outside, not bothering so much. And I'm sure that probably isn't true, but it feels more like when you go into scenes where they are, there's a few scenes where lady is outside shooting. Yeah, this kind of stuff. On these ones, they've kind of done the right thing, and you're backlit, albeit it's a little bit blown in the sky and that kind of thing. I think you could have probably held that, and I feel from a camera point of view, I might have tried to frame this one from slightly higher up and not have the mountain range in the lower half of the frame just there, bring it a little bit higher up to kind of the upper third, I guess, maybe. Yeah. I think that would have felt a little bit better, because everything is driving towards this shot, feeling, I guess, oppressive. It's hot. They're going through the desert. She looks a little bit worse for wear. So bringing up that mountain range and, well, bringing up the camera height and placing the mountain range a little bit higher in shot is something I might have experimented with. Apart from that, there are good things going on with the backlighting. Inconsistency between the two angles just there, in terms of exposure, which you could deal with somewhat in post. But then these shots where everyone's just flat, super flat, and her complexion, it would really be a concern of mine if I was director of photography on this, knowing that her complexion was so pale and that you're pairing her with male cast who are older and have stubble and are wearing hats, and their face is going to be a little bit more down naturally or darker naturally. I would be attempting at every turn, especially if I knew that this was going to happen with the grade, I'd be attempting every turn to get more contrast into her face or more shape through light into her face, because they've really not done the best job by her. This shot actually feels like the grade isn't as intensely sepia tone as in some of the other shots, which is weird as well. There's an inconsistency of how the grade actually sits across some of these scenes. The prison scene just here really bugged me because they have hard light. I've spoken about this kind of thing at length on other videos. They have hard light coming from both directions. People like to be backlit, but the character on the left here is backlit, if you will. It's hitting his face, but his back's to camera. And then this character is getting front lit with the bars just firing onto his face, which is kind of super distracting. And then we cut to the reverse angle and he's getting the bars on his face with a hard light. Just feels a little bit off. I'm not a fan of it. And I felt that the initial prison scene as well was actually a little bit distracting in terms of framing, especially for Willem Dafoe. Just there, he's sitting at an odd point within the bars. And I went and grabbed a load of other scenes just to make a comparison here. So other prison scenes, yeah, you do get people obscured by the bars, but they're not also being interfered with by the light. There's good light going on his side of the face here. You can make him out. There's super bright in the background. You can have super bright backgrounds. It's fine. And then you've got just enough going on to edge our character on the right-hand side, enough to edge the frame, the bars. It gives you context and it allows you to see everyone. Again, in this frame, they position the actor close enough to the bars that you can see her whole face between them. And on top of that, we have a nice edge light on her. We've got a little ping in her face, in her eye just there. We can see our other character on the right-hand side. There are concessions to blocking and the staging of everything for the camera within these shots. And in the other one, it didn't feel like that had been thought about as much. This is another good example. He's very close to the bars there, so you can see both of his eyes. You don't always have to have a rigid frame which adheres to all the things that I'm talking about just here, but it does make sense to do it rather than not. I would say, by all means, go out, break all these rules, do it your own way, and do something incredibly creative and stylized. But you better be sure that it is incredibly creative and stylized, because otherwise, you could go with this and it would work, and you would see the character. And you've got Willem. Goodness me, you have Willem Dafoe and Christoph Waltz in your film, and you're going to obscure their faces with a bar and with lighting, and just get them right up to the bar. Let us see his face. Let him act, and we'll just get drawn into the character. At that point, everything else just falls away. If his performance is fantastic, people are going to just forgive any number of other things. But all of those tiny things that you're doing that undermine the audience's ability to get into the character, to really start to feel what they're about. Just I don't know. I'm really struggling with how you'd get to that point. Here's another one. The character in this instance is right at the back of the cell. He's at the back of the cell. Now, maybe in the scene he just moved backwards or forwards, but the point is you can see him clearly. The cell is, in this one, it's kind of almost a silhouette. You're getting a little bit of light down the middle of it. But in each of these examples, you can see they've taken care to make sure that you can see the eyes, you can see the face of the characters. Now I'm just going to jump back again, and I just don't think that this plays out quite as well. Christoph Waltz does okay there. I will give him that. Then Willem Dafoe does not just there. And then later on, just here, it just doesn't work nearly as well because there's just too much distraction going on across his face with that light. It's crazy. Really don't get it. Another example of our leading lady just getting a slightly odd light on her face, very hard nose shadow. You can see it pinging in her eyes. Very flat. Just bring in a floppy over the top. Cut out some of this. Kick a little bit of this light just back to edge him. I know it'd be a little bit stylized because you can see the light coming from there, but it'd be so much better. It would just bring it to life. Same with the two gentlemen just there. Just take them down a tiny bit on that side so we're not so much cheek and ear. And then do a different grade as well, so we can see their skin tone and, what color their uniforms are and all the rest of it. Yeah, hard light on him. It's not too bad. That's not too bad. But when we look at him and then we see him in that first shot just there, goodness me, is it a difference? Just robs it of so much character. Super flat. Too flat for the tonality of the scene just there, because they've taken this all down to, if that was kind of green in the background and then you had the color contrast with him, because that's nothing you play with here. Of course, we have light as a tool for creating contrast, but you do have color, and the point at which you take it to a sepia wash, you eliminate all of that. So if anyone's ever shot something and they've intended to take it to black and white, I've done a couple of things where I've taken it to black and white. I will monitor it in black and white so that as a kind of sense check, in case my lighting is off or my ratios, I'm not getting them or I'm not getting my contrast, I can look at the screen and I can see, oh God, I've lit the background to the same tone as the character's fill side, and it's just like blending into one. You get the same problem if you take it all off to sepia. That's not going to play well because you don't have the color contrast. If you're there and your set designer has carefully gone about creating an outfit and creating a room and any little bits of set dressing and set design to make that contrast happen, and then you wash it to sepia, you've just undone all the goodness. And then if your lighting is flat or not conducive, it just all goes out the window. Super sad. And some of these shots, I'm sure, would brush up fine. You got interesting faces, interesting talent. Too weirdly flat on her again. The sepia is doing nothing for her skin. Or it is. It's she's got lovely skin. It's a lovely glow, but it's not really getting the most out of your talent. Another scene with super hard light on his face just here and nothing in the eyes. Just nothing in the eyes there. And you can make artistic arguments for not having characters with loads of catch lights in their eyes. Maybe he's meant to feel a little bit imposing and moody, but it just, I don't know, it's shot after shot. This I kind of like, actually, because you've got all of this going on in the background with practicals, you've got the light coming through onto the wall just there, and then you do have little pops hitting people, got a bit of shape on him. So I'd say out of all the frames that I've seen in this, that is probably my favorite. And you know, you take it to a little bit too dark black and white just there. It's got something. That's got character. I like it. I like the way that I assume it's Willem Dafoe in the foreground is lit just there, because he's got this cool edge down sort of both sides of his face. So you don't see any of the center of his face. That's cool. That's really nice. That's a stylistic choice. And what I just said about the eye thing and making him look imposing and, you know, not have any catchlight, this, where there's no features and it's just the outline, but you can still see it's the character. That's cool. There's a bit of light on the floor that helps to, you know, delineate between different things and see the legs walking and people moving. So there's good stuff in there. It's just sad that it's all being disguised by that dreadful grade. I apologize to whoever did it. I'm not meaning to diss them, but yeah, another one. This one actually has, if you want to make an argument for it, this shot has light, as we saw, cast onto Talent's face just there. You know, you got hard outline of the bars, but it isn't the only thing that's illuminating his face. He is getting fill from somewhere else. So it isn't just hard light and you can't see his features. It actually plays within the tone of the scene that you're seeing. Yeah, love it. I went a little bit off the deep end. If you're looking at references for hard top lights coming in, then yeah, you've got Star Wars here, Lando, all of that light coming from the top. What's fun with this one is you can actually see why that light is the shape that it is, because you've got all of the slats in the background and you've got some shadowing, you've got some light, and you've got this structure going on here, and they're framed a little bit lower so you can see up into the ceiling. You're not just at head height with them. So that kind of attention to detail and using the structure of the set that you're in to justify why the light feels the way that it feels. And when you cut to a shot like this and you can see all of that stuff on the floor, you know where it's coming from. You know why it's like that. You know that in that room, yeah, you have got all these weird kind of breakup patterns of hard light coming through from the ceiling. But it makes sense. It's justified. Whereas in a lot of the scenes going back to Dead for a Dollar, you know, back at the beginning, and they're walking through the prison. Okay, that light's coming through from the ceiling just there. But then why is he also getting another hard light source coming in from a different angle? It just doesn't make me believe, especially on Willem Dafoe just there. You know, it's coming in this way and it's coming in this way. I just don't think I'm a fan of it. Oh, yeah, completely unfair comparison. I think I'll leave it at that, really, because as a hard blooming beam of light coming in there and then soft wrap around so you can see his face, you can see it edging him in the back just there, and we know why it's edging him, because it's coming in, it's super bright outside, feels hot. You have in that shot lots of warm tones, but the warm tones are justified. You got the warm vibe from the light through the haze. You got the warm wallpaper and the wooden desk and the chair and the wooden floor and the kind of brass lamp going on just there. And then you got his warm skin tone, but you can still see a sort of whiteness in his beard. It's not all just bleached out. And the blacks, they're warm, but they're fairly clean. They're not just all treated in the same way. So unfair comparison, you know, just going back to, what's that, True Grit is that Roger Deakins? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Unfair comparison. So, to sum up, I have been on enough projects where things didn't turn out exactly how I wanted them to know that it is something which happens by degrees. But whenever I see something which has obviously passed through so many hands and so many people who work in the industry and has such great talent attached to it, has an audience, I look at some of the comments on the trailers for this, and people are thrilled at the idea of these two actors coming together and doing a film like this. So it's got a lot going for it. How it ends up feeling like this, how the trailer ends up feeling like this, another question entirely in the editing. I can't wait to watch the film and get an honest sense for how it is, because some of the reviews out of it was Venice Film Festival, did talk about it favorably. The storylines, the arcs, you don't get a sense of those completely in the trailer. Maybe they're fantastic, and maybe the acting really does work when it's in that context. I would love to see Sonic the Hedgehog on this. I would love them to revisit the look of it. I would love them to, have another chance to. Hell, I would do it. I would just love a chance to go through and see how it could look and see if that would improve anything. Probably not going to get that chance. I don't think anyone will do it, but it would be intriguing to look, see what they shot it on. It's probably going to be a digital acquisition, so you just got to imagine there's more there to work with. Anyway, I hope that people have found this enjoyable. I am intending to do more live broadcasts like this. It takes the pressure off me editing. It allows for a little bit of back and forth discussion. And also it means that I'm more likely to give a completely honest reaction to something. So if there is something that you want me to have a look at, break down, it could be film, could be a music video, could be TV series, whatever it is, YouTube video, maybe it's your own content, something you've been working on, I would be honored if you would drop a comment down below. Send me a message on Instagram, easy to find, Still Moving Instagram, or Dale Campbell, DOP on Instagram. Just drop me a message, give me a recommendation. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a great evening.